A number of subscribers on the Daily Agenda YouTube channel have asked me to make documentaries about a range of nationalist organisations. However, I don't intend to make documentaries about organisations with which I had absolutely no involvement of any description, as I don't like to work from textbook theories and remote ideas, quite frankly. It's not me, it's not my style. I need to speak with authority on a subject, and that's the reason why I've decided to speak about the British movement. That's what this documentary is about, or the British National Socialist Movement, BNSM, descended from the NSM. Formed in 1968 by Colin Jordan after his divorce from the Dior heiress. And, well, I was born in the same year, and that very organisation, formed just before I was born, almost put an end to my life on the 20th of January 1990. In fact, that was their objective. That's what they were ordered to do. More to the point, their area commander was ordered to do it. So the truth with the British movement, it's an extremist organisation. Hardline, hardcore, National Socialist. Not nationalist, National Socialist. There being a fundamental difference between National Socialism and nationalism. Do we need to detail all of those differences? Surely not. Because if this is going out to an esoteric audience, then they will understand the differences between National Socialism, nationalism, and fascism. And I'm not a National Socialist or a fascist. I'm a nationalist. I disavow myself of National Socialism and fascism. And the British movement, in truth, was riddled with factions and factional fighting in all of its background. The NSM, quite frankly, was a joke. And one of the reasons why the Dior heiress divorced Colin Jordan is because she said, frankly, he wasn't man enough. He wasn't leader material. He was just a middle-class nobody. Well, I never met Colin Jordan, so I can't comment on that, but that was their opinion, and I can't confirm or contradict it. And she's dead now, obviously. Been dead for a number of years, so we can hardly do a seance and bring her back to see if she's revised her opinion, can we now? Although it would be very interesting, wouldn't it? Likewise with Colin Jordan, who's also been dead for a number of years, and never succeeded in patching up his differences with John Tindle as well, I might add. And this is the interesting thing, is that, and I'll come to this shortly, is that the British National Party and the British movement had a very tense relationship, in truth. And Tindle, and that really came from Tindle's big spat with Colin Jordan over arrests and imprisonments, and also the methodology and the ideological path Colin Jordan wanted to take. See, Tindle realised that there was no room for National Socialism. Overt shows of Nazism would never be embraced by the British electorate. And quite apart from wanting to win by using direct action units and active service units, in other words, armed revolution, which is bedeviled the NS, quite frankly, all of these years, Tindle realised that there was a different path, and he wanted to take the electoral path and win at the ballot box. And that's what he did. And so this massive schism took place between Jordan and John Tindle, and they never succeeded in healing that rift. And that's just the way it is. You know, we can't get on with everyone. And it also proved how fundamentally different both Jordan and Tindle were in their thinking and outlook and approach to anti-establishment politics. So my own experience with the British movement started in August 1989. I had some school friends in my hometown, and I'd always been very interested in military history, particularly the Second World War, and focused mainly on the fanatical clash between National Socialism and communism on the Eastern Front. And so obviously it was a great interest to me. And when a friend of mine said, well, we were in a pub one night talking about this. I think it was called the Aloft pub in actual fact. It's still called the Aloft now to this day. He said, well, you do realise that these people still exist? And I said, who exists? And he said, well, National Socialists. And I said, well, you're joking. I said, that's a thing of the past, it's history. And he said, no, absolutely not. You know, he said, there's this organisation called Blood and Honour and the British movement, and we've been to some of their meetings. Come along with us and see what you think of it. And so I went along with them to the Red Lion, Ena in Derbyshire, and met the legendary leader, the leader of Blood and Honour, Screwdriver, namely Ian Stewart Donaldson, himself later killed in a so-called RTA on the A52 in Derbyshire in September 1993. And I spoke to him. I actually found him to be a very polite and friendly man. I didn't get a chance to say much at the first meeting, although, you know, I found him very approachable and always willing to discuss people who were, you know, just starting out or much lower in the ranks. And I was a nobody. Quite frankly, I had no rank. I was not a member of any organisation and didn't intend to join. I was just talking about National Socialism to him and how he believed National Socialism could triumph again, what people call today neo-Nazism. And I took the view almost immediately that it was simply far too extreme and would never work electorally, but was there another way in which it could work? And so I went to some more meetings, and then eventually I went to the Monday Arms in Ilkeston in Derbyshire, which is about nearly 3 miles from Ena, which was another favourite haunt of Screwdriver, and haunt being the operative, because that place has haunted me for over 35 years, because the people involved in it won't let me forget it and won't allow me to put it behind me. Not a year has gone by since where they haven't reminded me of it in one toxic form or another, and so we'll come to that shortly. I'd met at the Nag's Head, I think it was, in Ena, a chap called Gordon Jackson, big, brute, violent bully. He'd got gangster written all over him. Well, that's what he thought he was, and his boys were terrified of him. And I met there a young man, a skinny young skinhead, called Alistair Ballman. I'll bet he wishes now to this day he was still that skinny. And I wish I was still as skinny as the night I first met him. We didn't hit it off at all. No, there was deep friction between us. And he suspected me because I wasn't a skinhead. And I was dressed in trendy clothes. Fashion labels was what I was interested in at the time. But I had a big political interest and considered myself to be a nationalist. But yeah, Ballman seemed to take an instant dislike to me. And Gordon Jackson, of course, was just interested in bullying whoever he could and recruiting them and extracting membership fees from them and donations. Sounds very familiar, doesn't it, with all the other issues I've covered about similar people on the so-called right with their grifting operations. And so 2 brothers told me not to have anything to do with Jackson. A close friend of mine also warned me not to have anything to do with him, which was fair enough. And for all the reasons that I already suspected. You know, the man was dangerous. You know, he was a toxic, violent bully. And I didn't really see how he was involved in anything of a political nature, quite frankly, other than the fact that he was plastered in neo-Nazi paraphernalia, badges, etc., and patches, and thought he was somebody far bigger than what he actually was. I mean, he was a big brute of a guy, absolutely, and he used that physical prowess to intimidate people with. In fact, just 3 miles from where I'm stood right now, at a place called Ucknall in Nottinghamshire, he made a British movement member dig his own grave in the woods at night time near a territorial army base, and told him to get down into the grave and put a gun to the back of his head and said, "That's the last warning you ever get if you ever disobey my orders again, I'll shoot you in the back of the head and you'll be buried in a grave just like this. So that was Gordon Jackson. I didn't know that about him at the time, nor did I know about the fact that he was convicted of raping, brutally raping a 15-year-old girl in Nottinghamshire, and amazingly secured a non-custodial sentence. Well, maybe the judge could explain that, or the corrupt courts, because that's what I regard them to be. And they're not going to stop me from saying that. I absolutely guarantee you they will not stop me from saying that. How Jackson got a non-custodial sentence simply beggars belief, but he did. And his victim, when I last spoke to her 10 years ago, still lived, or just over 10 years ago, still lived in fear of him to that day, and his family. And so, but I don't live in fear of them. I won't back down to them. I won't back down to any form of intimidation and terror tactics. And I'm about to explain to you why. So, the two brothers from my hometown told me that Jackson was pilfering membership funds and also donations, and indulging in largesse, shall we say, buying new leather furniture and computers for his home. In other words, decorating his little palace just 3 miles away at Lawton Crescent in Hucknall. And he tried to recruit me, and I was having none of it. And so I went to the Monday Arms on the 20th of January 1990, basically to say farewell to Ian Stewart and have one last conversation with him, as I had no intention of taking it any further. I certainly didn't want to be involved with the British movement, because it was an extremist organisation. I actually found them quite unbalanced, in truth, you know, and how they thought they could ever have won with that mentality just beggared belief. That was my opinion. But yes, I spoke to Ian Stewart, and he actually advised me to join the British National Party, which I did. I explained this in the BNP docu-series. I went upstairs and spoke to the BNP's representative, Carl Brown, and his colleague, Dean Hopewell, and I gave them the £10, signed up with a leaflet, made the membership application, went back downstairs, and was almost immediately confronted with Gordon Jackson. My goodness, what a horrible, odious creature he was. Pure evil, in truth. That's my experience of dealing with him. And so Jackson proceeded to demand, that's right, demanded to know why I wasn't joining the British movement. And I told him so in no uncertain terms. And he was very angry, enraged, which was almost his default setting, to be perfectly honest with you, and became almost violent, and so it came to a verbal clash, and I didn't back down. And even though he was quite a bit bigger than me, I had no intention of backing down to him. And I told him perfectly clearly, you know, if you want to do it, then let's go, let's do it. Because I'm not going to back down to you. You're not bullying me like you bully these other guys, yeah? Do it, let's go. But he wouldn't. And because he didn't fancy his chances. You know, Jackson liked 6-1 odds, quite frankly, or making people dig a hole in the woods and terrifying them into silent obedience, as I explained earlier about the incident at Hucknall. And I wasn't having any of that. And I told him, you know, what the two brothers in my old town told me. And yeah, he was really, really enraged and demanded to know who had told me, where the information had come from. I refused to tell him. And so well, I was young. I was only 22. And I dealt with it in an unwise manner, on reflection. But the benefit of eyesight is a wonderful thing. Only if you're armed with it at the moment in time, isn't it? So therefore it's absolutely useless at that moment in time. It's only good when you're looking back in a retrospect. And this is a retrospect on that night and the British movement in general. And so, yes, Jackson, he yes, he said, let's have a drink together. And so we had a drink together. And he drank his halfway down and I said, just watch my my pint. Well, yeah, I'm just going to nip to the toilet. And you know, really, had I been older and wiser, I would have smelled the rat and gone. And then he came back with his boys, didn't he? His thug enforcers, you know, his skinhead thugs. One of which was a young Scottish guy with a scar down his face. Thoroughly horrible, nasty, evil piece of work. Yeah, absolutely. You know, I've not changed my attitude towards them in any way, shape or form to this day from that night. And my attitude is exactly the same. No tolerance. Zero tolerance, quite frankly. And they need to know that, because they'll be watching this documentary. There will be no reconciliation between us, being absolutely no doubt about it. And this is the reason why there will be no reconciliation of any description. And so they started being verbally abusive and giving it the big one, to coin the modern phrase, giving it the big one, in it. Although obviously he had a Scottish accent, but not all of them did. They were smattered from all over the country, and Bullman was nowhere to be seen at this time. And I remember they weren't getting anywhere with me at all, and I was actually, you know, quite chippy and mocking them, really. I wasn't going to back down to them. And the pub, I could have put it, the anteroom was just packed with some old locals, and mainly neo-Nazis. And Jackson went round the corner, and he spoke to a chap, was probably in his early 50s. He had a charcoal grey Combry on with a white shirt, about I don't know, probably 5'10", very well built, stocky, and he got a number of boneheads around him, stood at the bar, one of which was fairly tall, with short dark hair, who later matched the exact description of a man I now know today as Tim Heppel. We'll get to him later. And Jackson said, so what should I do with him, basically, you know? And he said, just take him outside and do him. You know, they had a bit of an argument, and that was the end result of it. So they dragged me outside by the hair. My hair was quite long at the time, longer than it is now. They're such brave warriors, these National Socialist radicals, that it takes six of them onto one. These are not people to be respected. No respect for them whatsoever. These are cowards we're talking about. Violent cowards. That's all. They're good only in a gang. They're useless one-on-one. That's the type we're talking about. They don't like those odds. Their regional commander, Gordon Jackson, didn't like those odds either. You know, he liked 6-1. That's where they felt strong, as all stupid pack animals do, quite frankly. And so we went out into the courtyard, and they kicked me senseless, and then stopped. Jackson demanded the information, and I refused to give him. And then he started again, ordered them to start again. He didn't do it himself, you know, he didn't get his hands dirty at all. And so it went on, and I was absolutely pouring with blood from head and facial wounds. And I remember the penultimate kick came in and knocked my right hand away from my right eye, and the last kick came in and got me straight in the eye socket, which did most of the damage. And the scar that you can see here, and this scar here, and later where they stabbed me in the forehead and here, yeah, very unpleasant. And I survived it. I survived it. That's why I'm here to tell this story to this day, because I survived it. And yeah, he demanded the information again, and I was just totally incoherent by that time. He told the others to go because obviously he believed the police would be on the way. And although how they would be on the way, it was just begging belief, because I had no idea there were any police around. And I was fighting for my life, absolutely pouring with blood from head and facial wounds. And so Jackson demanded again with a knife at my throat, and so I told him. And I was thinking of my girlfriend at the time, Catherine. I wanted to see her again. And And then he stood up and laughed and urinated all over the wall at the side of my right hand shoulder, and it ran down by my legs, and it was mixed with my own vomit, my own urine, because with head injuries that's what happens. And it was freezing cold, absolutely freezing, star-studded night, 20th of January, back in the days when we had real winters, not like today. And I decided, you know, that I had to get moving, and quickly. The only thing that got me moving was thinking of my girlfriend Catherine at the time, who I loved, and she became my mantra, my will to live. And so I saw some bins to the right hand side, and I headed towards them and crawled across 2 waste grounds and collapsed at the bottom of Bath Street in Ilkeston. I was attended by an off-duty NHS nurse and her husband, who phoned an ambulance. However, there was a limited ambulance service at the time because of industrial action. What a night to pick, being subjected to an attempted murder. I can laugh about it now, but believe me, at the time it was anything but funny. And so yes, then I remember lying there, and you know, I felt like I was dying, and then I saw blue lights flashing on the windows to my right hand side, and a siren. I thought, oh crikey, the ambulance is here, I'm going to be saved. But it wasn't the ambulance, was it? It was Derbyshire Police. And the sergeant jumped out and wanted me to get up off the floor, and I said I couldn't move. And he said, well, you either let us move you, or you're going to be on that floor permanently, and in an hour scenes of crimes officer will be photographing you, you know, your body. And so I let them pick me up. They put me in the back of the van, and they were horrified because of the mess, blood squirting everywhere. They took me to Ilkeston Community Hospital. It's all described in my book, The Fanatics, The Rise and Fall of the British National Party. I'll put the link in again in this video at the end of it. And there I had to wait, and then eventually I was transferred to the Queen's Medical Centre and treated there for head and facial injuries and damage to my upper chest, and both of my arms were absorbed one barrage of kicks with Doc Martin boots after the other. And so Jackson, that's what he excelled at. And so onto the scene came Special Branch a few days later. But first it was DC Jim Skinner, Derbyshire Police CID. He was a very likeable chap. I liked him an awful lot. Thought he was a decent bloke. He wasn't Special Branch. Before that, an inspector from Ilkeston Police Station came with one of his sergeants to see me, and they got enough information and carried out a raid on Jackson's home at Ucknall, 3 miles away, and recovered a number of firearms. And so going back to the police station with DC Jim Skinner, I was told that all of the firearms were not illegal, apart from one, but they couldn't prosecute him for it because he didn't have any ammunition to go with it, which was very odd. So they wanted to charge him with attempted murder, but the view was taken that it was such a difficult charge to prove that they felt there wasn't enough evidence to prove they intended to murder me, even though the damage that they did to me, I think, pretty much proved they were intent on killing me. And so they charged him with Section 18 malicious wounding with intent, which is, you know, minimum 10-year sentence, quite frankly, which is what he should have got. And obviously he was taken straight across the road to Ilkeston Magistrates Court, South East Derbyshire Magistrates Court, and remanded into custody at Lincoln Prison. Although a week later, with his solicitor, Ron Burkitt, who was last known to be working for Cartwright King in Nottingham. Let's hope he doesn't apply for a criminal behaviour order. They've got this really bad habit in Nottingham of applying for criminal behaviour orders because it's such a crooked city. They can't cope with the truth, particularly about this matter, believe me. And so Cartwright King, yes, well, I later dealt with Mr. Burkitt many years later, and he said he couldn't remember anything to do with Gordon Jackson or his appeal against conviction. Maybe I've given the game away, have I? Well, not entirely. The best is yet to come. And so this is the flavour of the British movement. You know, behind the scenes, they were running guns, narcotics, and just carrying out general criminal activity, quite serious criminal activity. shipping sawn-off shotguns from one county to the other, what today they would call county lines drug dealing. This was so-called ideological warriors. Work that one out if you can. They put Tommy Robinson to shame with the use of narcotics. But that said, you know, so many of these skinheads were actually on narcotics, amphetamine in particular. Some of them cocaine if they could afford it. Ian Stewart Donaldson himself actually used amphetamine on a frequent basis to cure his depression and to give him that essential buzz on stage. A lot of the lead singers in the skinhead bands also used amphetamine. You know, it was the currency of performance, and so it was everywhere. And yes, it was an extremely dangerous time, and now death threats coming in left, right and centre, and offers of protection from rival factions. And in the space of really 2 weeks, you know, I'd gone from being a normal guy with a decent job in construction into a nightmare world of violent retribution, tit for tat, which reminded me of Northern Ireland in truth. And it was horrendous, quite frankly. And it really, all of it confirmed my original take on the ultra-violent, vile British movement. Yes, I know the howls of derision that'll come in, and the abuse in the comments. Yes, well, crack on. And nothing's changed, has it? And that simply proves my point. Post those things, by all means. It simply proves my point about these people. And so, yes, going forward, they then tried to stop me from testifying. I got a scar. I don't know if you can see it. Knife wound in the head, and had to be hospitalised again and stitched up and visited by detectives. No one was arrested, although Gordon Jackson was suspected of it, of ordering it, that is. But no one was arrested for it. This became a regular feature across the years, no one being arrested. Now, Derbyshire police had arrested Jackson, but no one in the attack gang. And they hadn't arrested the man who gave them the order to take me outside and do me. Now, in fairness to DC Jim Skinner, and I will always be fair to Jim, in truth, because he was the only decent one I encountered out of all of those coppers. And I know that he tried to do his best, and he did try to catch. He even set a trap, you know, for the boss man. You know, the grey-haired old git, as I called him. And at South East Derbyshire Magistrates Court. Obviously he wasn't there and didn't walk into the trap. And Burkitt, of course, well, you know, he was relaying information on behalf of Jackson. Proven fact. Although if Mr. Burkitt's still alive, I'm sure he'll not be able to remember it, or have convenient memory loss, as these people usually do. But I don't at all. And so the trial itself was it was ludicrous. It was in Court 1 at Derby Crown Court. Now, during the trial, Alistair Ballman threatened to kill me directly outside Court 1. And yes, that resulted in me chasing him down the stairs and him going out the court building. And I gave him a few threats of my own. And typically, yes, I was called back into court to explain my behaviour towards Ballman. He didn't have to explain his death threat against me. The judge, Brian Wood, simply said it was neither here nor there what happened, and it was entirely understandable that if I'd reacted in the way that I did. And I did react in that way. Absolutely right. Different matter one-on-one, isn't it? Absolutely. And yeah, it typically the medical records from the Queen's Medical Centre went walkabout, and that meant fundamentally it wasn't possible to convict Jackson of Section 18. You know, it's 50 miles from the Queen's Medical Centre to Derby Crown Court. How could they possibly get lost? Well, they didn't get lost at all. That's another matter we'll get to later. Now, they were found at the Queen's Medical Centre many years later, and the Crown Prosecution Service simply shelved them. They were sent to Derby Crown Court, and that's a proven fact. And so what happened was they'd made a deal behind the scenes, Jackson wasn't pleading guilty to anything, obviously. That wouldn't look very good with his boys, would it? He had to carry on putting on the big man, the big commander routine. But yes, the deal had been done, absolutely, without a doubt, involving Special Branch. And DC Jim Bailey, horrible, horrible gangster. In fact, dealing with DC Frank Bailey of Derbyshire Police Special Branch, I could never determine whether he was worse than Jackson or whether Jackson was worse than him. In truth, actually, I thought he was worse than Jackson. That's what I was dealing with. And I became very aware of the fact very quickly that I was surrounded by snitches, spies, police spies, and very, very dirty tricks. Extremely dirty tricks. Dangerous, deadly dirty tricks. And I intended to survive, quite frankly, if I possibly could. And I did, obviously, because I'm here to this day making this documentary about the British movement. And my experience of dealing with the British movement. And quite frankly, those people who just read about the British movement, you'll never know anything about it. I'm telling you the reality of the British movement. The real world experience. Forget the textbooks, forget Searchlight magazine, forget Hope Not Hate. Always rely on someone who has actually had direct experience of these organisations to tell you the truth about them. And so Jackson was convicted of ABH. ABH, yes, of course, which meant he would only get a light sentence. 27 months is what the judge gave him. And he said in his summing up that he was the leader of a pack of animals, which is quite true. That's exactly what they were. Disgusting pack of animals, cowards, low-life trash. Absolutely. And if they're watching, that's my opinion of you to this day. We are not friends, we're not going to be reconciled, we are enemies. And we will be enemies long beyond this life. Believe me, we will be enemies in the next life as well. Because I do not forgive or forget what was done to me that night and all of the years since then. Because these people have never left me alone in all that time. And that's the whole point of me making this documentary. And so, yes, Jackson went on his merry way to prison. And the usual procedure when a defendant convicted of a crime is making an appeal against conviction is that the victim and the police and the Crown Prosecution Service are all advised of the appeal against conviction. Not in this case. No, absolutely not. No. Many years later, at Derby High Court, it came out in paperwork submitted by Derbyshire Police. Nothing but an organised criminal gang as far as I'm concerned. If they want to arrest me, no problem. Go and get a criminal behaviour order. Make an application for another criminal behaviour order. It doesn't bother me in the slightest. I'm not going to be silenced by gangsters in or out of police uniform. Got it? I hope you have got it, because there's much more coming. And so yes, it apparently transpired that they hadn't been informed of the appeal against conviction, which was absolute nonsense, just complete falsehood. And I knew it was a lie. And it then became perfectly clear to me that they'd actually been involved with the appeal in getting Jackson's conviction quashed. Lying about it. Lying about them not being advised of the appeal, and yet the Crown Prosecutor was there to contest the appeal, and so was a Derbyshire police officer. It's not bad going, is it, for an organisation that claimed it wasn't advised of the appeal in advance? So how did they know to turn up? See, these people are children, infantile children, but they're never put to the test in a tribunal of fact. Every judge they go before lets them off the hook because they're all in it together themselves. It's just called organised crime, the establishment, quite frankly, and the British movement. And this is my point about it. So people say, oh no, the British movement ceased to be a state operation when Column 88 was disbanded in the 1980s. Well, that's absolute drivel. Absolute drivel. The NATO operation, i.e. Operation Gladio, started in Italy, post-war, for the stay-behind groups. In other words, the NATO commanders had this bright idea of recruiting neo-Nazis and fascists across Europe to form a reserve action group against the Red Army in the event of invasion by the Warsaw Pact, that they would be the last line of defence to carry on the resistance. And so they recruited all of these fascist and neo-Nazi groups, one of which was the British Movement, Column 88. And Gordon Jackson, of course, was heavily involved with Special Branch. Probably explains the reason why he got that non-custodial sentence after raping that 15-year-old girl. Is there another reason? Well, I can't think of one in the slightest. And of course a raft of other criminal offences. And so Jackson got his conviction overturned because the 3 liberal judges, the degenerates at the Court of Appeal, who refused my appeal against conviction many years later for exposing all of this, I might add. That's the evil we're up against here. That's the criminal conspiracy. And so they said it was injurious to his reputation. A convicted rapist, paedophile, had a reputation to defend, and what Judge Woods had said about him was injurious to his reputation. Come on. Honestly, people talk about two-tier justice, two-tier policing, as though it's something new. I've seen it for decades. It's nothing new to me. It might be new to all of you, and I'm sorry for the fact that you're just discovering it, but I've known about it for many decades. You know, I'm totally au fait with it. I've written books about it. I've been in prison for it. Okay? I'm totally au fait with two-tier justice. In other words, the organised criminal gang that calls itself the establishment and its dodgy justice outcomes. And so, Jackson, yes, not to be cited as a conviction. I was not informed of the appeal. I was not informed of the outcome of the appeal. And it came to many years later when I wrote The Fanatics, the book I spoke about earlier, subtitled The Rise and Fall of the British National Party. But obviously, 2 or 3 chapters of it covers the British movement and blood and honour. And so Alistair Bullman came to see me. He'd bought a signed copy that afternoon at Eastwood Football Club. And he'd come back with his boys. Loads of them, actually. There's nearly 100 of them in the Wellington Public House in my hometown. It's still there. It's still called the Wellington, on Sunday afternoon. And it could have turned very ugly, but obviously Bullman stopped that. Because he isn't a coward, really. He's not into gang attacks. And whilst he was a lookout man on the 20th of January 1990, he didn't actually take part in the violence itself. And I knew he was scared of Gordon Jackson. And I know for a fact he tried everything in his power to get Jackson out of the British movement afterwards. Particularly when they found out about the rape of the 15-year-old girl. I know her name. I've been in contact with her many times. I won't name her. For her own safety, for her own peace of mind. I've got more respect for her from that. I think the poor woman has suffered enough at the hands of that evil organisation, the British movement. Yes, they're supposed to be opposed to paedophiles and rapists. Come on. This is the real world we're talking about. Okay? And so, yes, Jackson went on to lead his charmed life, secured compensation from the Home Office for wrongful conviction and unlawful detention. My goodness, come on. Sickening. Absolutely sickening. But in truth, justice was just around the corner. Because the one thing with Jackson, he was such an egomaniac. In fact, he was a violent sociopathic maniac, quite frankly. With murderous, violent rages. But also a coward. Because he would never take on anybody who could really fight. That's the thing with Jackson. It's the same with all of these sociopaths. You know, if someone can fight, they're not game. They're not interested. But with people who have any form of vulnerability or weakness, yes, then they become the monster. You know, such is human nature. It's such a complicated myriad of intrigue and deceit. And above all, deep interest, to me, at least. And so Jackson, the sociopath, couldn't keep his big mouth shut and started bragging about Special Branch and how certain people are going to be dealt with and how they get him out of trouble. And it was all around the British movement, which by that time had disowned him. And he was involved in gun running and Class A drug dealing and he was banged up at HMP Featherstone in Staffordshire, where he died of heart failure. The rumour was that he injected himself with heroin using a hypodermic needle, which is very interesting, really, considering the fact that hypodermic needles aren't available and they're not issued in prison kit. Unless you get one smuggled in, or nick one from in the prison itself, or more likely bribe a member of the prison staff. And then of course there's the acquisition of heroin. Well, that's easy enough in any dirty old prison, drug infested British prisons, no problem at all. But that was the allegation, coronary thrombosis. Either way, karma came to pay Mr. Jackson a visit and terminated his existence. And a damn good thing it was for everyone involved in that man's horrible life, quite frankly. Did I get any peace from it? No, not really. I found out about it about 9 months after he died, and then Bullman filled me in completely. In March 2004, and I went off in pursuit of the truth and obtained his death certificate, which is redacted. And when a death certificate is redacted, in other words, certain parts of it blacked out, there's something they need to cover up. And it was very revealing. In fact, it was so revealing, there are parts of it that I cannot disclose to you now. You can find the death certificate for yourself, Gordon Roland Jackson. HMP Featherstone, Staffordshire, 1995. Find it for yourself, it's entirely up to you. But I've got it. I've got a copy of it. I can show it you in private. I can even email it to you. I can send it on WhatsApp. No problem at all. But there's a name of someone on that birth certificate which could land me in court again, facing yet another application for an injunction and committal to prison proceedings. So we're not going to play into their hands on that one. But yes, the death certificate, very revealing. I spoke to the prison governor, and he was a very helpful man, and it didn't bring anything to a closure at all. And in all those years after that, what DC Jim Skinner called the particularly horrific attack, I didn't get any peace. I got threats from them repeatedly. The people I was involved in with the BNP, particularly CR, we all know who CR is, don't we? Yes, my old friend. Well, I'm not your old friend. I'm not your old friend, CR. We're enemies, and that's all there is to it. CR, my 2IC in the BNP, covered up for the attack gang for years, lied to me, and then later claimed he did it in the name of the cause. What cause? There is no cause. They were not serving any cause. They were not fighting for nothing. Nothing at all. And all that organisation did, quite frankly, the British movement, was carry out violent attacks, mainly on nationalists. And if we think of Tim Apple, the undercover special branch agent, also a Searchlight source inside the British movement, who later outed himself when it was time for him to retire from that particular brand of infiltration, and exposed Combat 18 in a World in Action documentary, which was very amusing. Yes, Tim Apple. I've always suspected it was Tim Apple stood with the grey-haired guy in his 50s at the bar when he said take him outside and do him, because the description is almost identical, quite frankly. But I can't confirm unequivocally that it was Tim Apple, but it did look like him. And so yes, Tim Apple, very interesting chap. He eventually left the planet with with his ufology work, another crank, and in my opinion, but a very deliberate type of crank. And his work inside the British movement was done for Special Branch, and they had a number of agents inside the British movement, a fleet of snitchers, some of them getting just as little as 20-30 quid for snitching. Enough to buy them 1 or 2 lines of FET, or amphetamine as they called it, sniff, and well, that mostly refers to cocaine these days, but that's no problem, because the British movement, what's left of it to this day, is still infected with sniff heads, as is Blood and Honour, and all the memorabilia bands as well. These people, they call themselves nationalists. I don't recognise them as nationalists. I'm a nationalist. They are National Socialists. That's what they call themselves, but they hide behind the umbrella phrase nationalism, because National Socialism at times seems a little too hardcore. Although their attitude towards nationalists is actually scathing. In truth, scathing. They call us, what is it, liberal conservatives. Just absolutely laughable. Considering the fact that these hardcore National Socialists got absolutely hammered by Red Action and anti-fascist action at the Battle of Waterloo in London, and there were 400 C-18 and BMP casuals in a pub up the road who could have intervened and totally reversed the course of that battle in their favour, but Charlie Sargent didn't, because he just wanted to get control of the skinhead music business. That nice income, running at about 20 grand a week in profits apparently at that time. And so yes, Jackson, yes, well, his profits in the British movement came to an end, so he had to go in search of them with drug dealing and gun running, and obviously he died in HMP Featherstone. And yes, he's an embarrassment to his family, according to them anyway. Many years ago when I spoke to one of them, they just want to pretend it never happened. Well, I guess I would if he was my relative, but fortunately he wasn't my relative. And I don't consider myself as one of Gordon Jackson's victims. I consider myself as the man who put Gordon Jackson on his path to termination, because that's exactly what I did. Also, it nearly cost me my life, quite frankly. Yeah, absolutely. But I stopped that man's crime wave and all the horror that he had inflicted on people and intended to inflict on other people. It's just that I had to suffer serious injuries in the process of doing it. And that's the way it is, unfortunately, for some people. It certainly was for me. But it became noticeable a couple of weeks ago when a couple of the British movement clowns, they're not goons, they're not enforcers, they're not radicals, they're clowns. They came onto this YouTube channel to say, oh, you grasped on the British movement, didn't you? Well, actually, I didn't grasp on the British movement. I was scraped up off the floor by Derbyshire police officers in uniform. They were actually riot police, and they were expecting trouble from the Monday Arms that night. I wonder why. Maybe it came from Tim Apple, that information. Oh, the other snitches they had there. And so I had no choice in the matter, quite frankly. But yes, I would have grasped them up anyway, because the extreme violence and cruelty and torture that they administered upon me, for next to nothing, quite frankly, was just completely and utterly unacceptable. And these people were not involved in any form of political campaign of any description. They weren't a political party. They weren't even a pressure group, as they called themselves alternatively. They were just a violent gang of criminals hiding behind National Socialism. In fact, after the heroes of the British movement had left me to bleed to death in the courtyard of the Monday Arms, Jackson went up to speak to Ian Stewart and told him, we've just done somebody who gives National Socialism a bad name. Which is interesting, because I've never been a National Socialism, so therefore how could a National Socialist, so how could I give National Socialism a bad name? Interesting. Perhaps the psychopath Gordon Jackson gave the British movement a good name. Perhaps that was his perception of what giving an organisation a good name was. But the British movement, the reason why it ended up on the extremism list after all of those years, after it was, I could put it, stymied, taken under control in Operation Gladio, which enabled Special Branch to infiltrate it, and also Searchlight magazine, and in truth it had no operational integrity worth talking about. But it's interesting that they're allowed to carry on attacking nationalists, isn't it? Because in truth, that's the only purpose the British movement had. I think the view was taken at high level that let's allow it to carry on attacking nationalists, because that does the job for us. You know, it helps to disincentivise nationalists so that they don't oppose the establishment, obviously. And in truth, that's all Gordon Jackson did. In fact, they put up wanted posters all over my hometown and other towns as well, saying Gordon Jackson wanted dead or alive for crimes against British nationalists. I mean, that in itself was truly damning, wasn't it? But the organisation itself was totally corrupted from within. I dare say it was corrupted at the highest level. I've attempted to contact a number of British movement leaders over the years to flesh things out, and received nothing but hostility and toxic responses, which pretty much explains itself, doesn't it? The fact that it ended up on the extremism list, put there by Michael Gove and Patriotic Alternative with it, because of their conjoint involvement with National Action, irrespective of what you think of National Action. And I share Dr. Larry O'Hara's view on NA that the majority of people involved in it weren't actually carrying out any acts preparatory to terrorism at all. They were just, well, extremists, quite frankly. But the British movement, a number of my subscribers have actually said, what took them so long? What took them so long to put the British movement on an extremism list? Well, by the time they actually put it on an extremism list, it had actually carried out a huge amount of damage within nationalism itself. And I remember John Tindle in 1991, when I used to exchange correspondence with him frequently. And he said that I explained to him what had happened with the British movement. And in 1990, he said he was very sorry about what had happened, and he could see that it had had a serious effect on me. And that his view that membership, joint membership of the British movement and the British National Party was not allowed, and that anybody with known involvement with the British movement should not be allowed to operate inside the BNP. And that obviously harked back to his big schism with Colin Jordan. And my own view is that the British movement, well, I know Patriotic Alternative still have involvement with the British movement. That's why they're both on the extremism list together. They're not similar organisations. Collett and Towler are Hitler and Mosley simps. The British movement are just sad wannabes. You know, they were head cases when they were younger, but they were mainly gang fighters, quite frankly. Sniffheads, gang fighters, and hiding behind National Socialist music and racial hatred. You know, they were the real racial supremacists, white supremacists, and the British National Party was not a white supremacist organisation. We were not racial supremacists, and they had a very dim view towards us, and likewise we had a very toxic view towards them, because my opinion of them was that whenever they were allowed to operate alongside us, they could do us nothing but harm electorally and in the press. And whenever you saw these, I could have put it, gaslighting photographs of the British National Party, they'd focus on the skinheads who'd come along from the British movement, and also Screwdriver and Blood and Honour, and they always focused on them, even though the vast majority of people in the BNP didn't dress like that, but they focused on them, and they tried to create this impression that everyone in the BNP was just a skinhead thug. Well, I've never been a skinhead. I've never been a thug, and I'm not a National Socialist, I'm not a fascist, I don't simp over Adolf Hitler or Oswald Mosley or Franco or anyone else. You know, I am a British nationalist, and I'm fully committed to the Remigration Now agenda, to the 95% supermajority, which we'll cover in another episode shortly. But the British movement, it should have been on an extremism list a very long time ago. Gordon Jackson should never have been allowed to operate for as long as he did. He did because of the police, because of Special Branch. There were police officers who wanted to stop him. I have absolutely no doubt about that at all, but there were police officers who were helping him. And that's the problem with the British movement, and that is the reason why I say that the British movement was never going anywhere. It was under the control of the British state, the secret state, particularly Special Branch and Searchlight, who were a tandem act, They were both running their own agents inside there, and anyone involved with it who can't come to terms with that fact is just lost. And I don't really care, quite frankly, whether they're lost or not. That's their own problem. That's their sad little fault. You know, I don't have any respect for anyone in the British movement. And the only person in all of these years from the British movement, and I don't know if he's still involved with them to this day, I presume he is, the only person who's ever shown an ounce of honesty and contrition and sorrow is Alistair Bullman, or Benny Bullman. He's the only one who's confessed to a great deal of chicanery. He also apologised to me in writing for what happened that night. He regretted it, and that's fair enough. I accept the apology, and that matter is settled between us. In fact, I saw him a few weeks ago, about a mile and a half away from where I am right now, and we had a little conversation there. And so, really, Benny is the only person who's ever been man enough to admit the truth. The rest of them got no time, no respect for them whatsoever. They're still the same low-life thugs that they were then. They still think they can send me threatening messages and intimidate me. You couldn't intimidate my discarded toenails. In truth, you couldn't intimidate my discarded toenails. I mean, where was the British movement against Red Action and class war? No, that was left to the BNP, wasn't it? You know, it was a man's game, not a pack animal's game. And all I'll say is this: the British movement as an organisation is no threat to anyone. It's on an extremism list because the government needed to counterbalance things with Islamic fundamentalism and make it look like we had some real problems with white extremists. Well, in all honesty, in the late 1980s and throughout the 80s and late 70s and the early 90s, the British movement was a serious problem, and the government never took one step to ban it because the government was controlling it. And anyone who doesn't like that, i.e. members of the British movement, past and present, well, that's just too bad, because you wasted all of your lives in an organisation controlled by the secret state. And if you were in an organisation controlled by the secret state, you worked for the secret state, and you're still controlled by them to this day. And that's all I have to say about the British movement, other than the fact that I hope it rots in hell. That's the Viking hell, by the way. H-E hell. There's a special place reserved for the likes of the people in the British movement in hell. It's called Nostrand Corpse Beach, and that's where I sincerely hope they end up, because that's what they've deserved. There's nothing good about the organisation. It's never done a thing for the British people. It's never done a thing for Britishness. It's never succeeded politically in any capacity. It was just a toxic, horrible, nasty organisation, and no one should lament its passing and its cementation on the extremism list, where it should have been a very long time ago. In truth, it should have been proscribed by a Home Secretary many years ago. That's my honest opinion of the British movement. But they didn't prescribe it, did they? They simply used it for their own bloody purposes.